Hello, you're very welcome. We're here today with poet Damian Gorman and traditional musician Leonard to talk about their forthcoming performance of Boy in the Hawkswell Theatre in Sligo. Boy was commissioned by the Hawkswell and will premiere here on the 10th of September. On the 11th of September, it will be performed at the Linen Hall Library in Belfast, and on the 19th of September in the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith. So you're welcome, Leonard and Damian. We might begin with each of you introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about the project and your involvement with it. And maybe, Damian, we could start with you.
Well, I'm Damian Gorman. I'm a poet and I'm Gerard Gorman's brother. And as well as doing my own writing, I've also, since I was about 18, I've worked with other people on their stories. People who've had particular experiences, often traumatic experiences related to the Troubles or other kinds of trauma. That's just a thing that has happened. And a few years ago, my own brother said to me, you see that stuff that you do with people who've been hurt in the Troubles or people from the Middle East or people who've, suffered violence or one sort or another. I want you to do that for me. That same thing that you've done sometimes with Kieran from the Hawkswell here. We did that in Derry. He said, I want you to do that same thing with me. And the story of what happened to me. Gerard having been abused when he was a very young, very small 11 and 12-year-old boy. So I thought about that. I wasn't going to say no to him, but I thought about how would we do this? He is my brother. But I would, if we do it, like I would do it with anybody. And we did. And we were commissioned by Blackstaff Press to do this book, which is a telling of Gerard's story so young. But he felt that there was more to say. And he would say this to me, what are we going to do? Is there anything else we can do? And Kieran said, there's somebody in Sligo here that I think you should meet. That was it. It wasn't in relation to Boy. There's this guy, Leonard Barry. And actually, we met here in the theatre and we just talked. We didn't talk about this. The idea wasn't that we would tell a story together. It was just, you should meet. And we met and we had a chat, and Leonard was talking to me about work he'd done in the Simon community with addicted people who suffer from addictions, which I do myself. And Gerard and I have a brother who died of alcoholism. So we got talking, and I walked away from that thinking, I don't know, were we supposed to sort of arrive with the project at the end of the meeting? And but I left thinking, no, that's a fella, I'd been told he's a great musician, but I was thinking he has something about him. He has a hinterland. He has, and then thinking, and that's somebody I could work with. And I could work with that hinterland, and we could have some kind of artistic dialogue about something. So that was my recollection of that.
Yeah. My name is Leonard Barry. I'm a traditional musician that plays uilleann pipes, originally from Kerry, now living in Sligo. And I've worked as a professional musician from the age of 18. And then when I was 30, I went to Trinity College and studied addiction studies. And from there, I've spent time in Australia working with First Nations people. I spent 10 years working with Dublin Simon in various services, including the outreach project, setting up a needle exchange, running a detox centre. And I suppose I would have always worked with marginalised people that were almost people forgotten by society. And I met Kieran and we had a coffee, and Kieran was asking me about my background. And he said, I've someone that I need you to meet. And like Damian said, we met, we had a conversation. I was like yourself. I kind of walked out going, well, okay, we've had the conversation. What happens from here? And then the the idea of boy was introduced to us both, and here we are. It's been a real honour and privilege to work on it.
There's an important connection, though, that has to be mentioned, which I mentioned to you when first we met, and Leonard was talking about the Simon community. I did my community service, court-ordered, with the Simon community in Belfast in 1983, having fallen through a jeweller's window out of my tree. Yes.
And what did happen from there? Like, how was Boy conceived? And it has a very particular architecture or form. And maybe, Damian, like, did it begin with the poems?
Well, it began with the idea that I wanted to work with him, but I didn't know on what. You know, there were a few notions, like you always, as a writer, you have notions, and then you commit to notions, and then something arrives. And I'm never short of notions, but I was thinking in a more focused way, like, well, what could we do? And then this thing that Jared had said about there's more to be said about that story, not just for me, but for, you know, for the many, many, many people who carry, you know, the realities of abuse with them. And I was thinking, the pipes. You know, there's something very, very basic and very, like, you've no resistance to the pipes, the Uilleann pipes. When somebody starts up, it's a summoning. You're summoned to the pipes. And it's very hard not to answer that summons, you know. I didn't know at the time, and I learned since that it's Jared's favourite instrument. I didn't know that. He told me that after he met Leonard. He says, you know, like, or did you know that the Uilleann pipes was and I said, no, I didn't know that. But I thought, I mean, you know, even though, like, I'm a poet, and that's the crossover between music and words, and you're trying to lift the words off the ground just with their own power, but I know that music can get into the crevices of the being that all the words in the world can't, you know. So then I out of all that, I had this notion, well, we could tell Jared's story again, but with two instruments, and we could harmonise as two people on that endeavour. And of course, Jared was entirely supportive of this, otherwise nothing would have happened, you know. And the reach would be greater than the lyric poem on its own, or maybe the pipes on their own, you know. And I mentioned that to you, and you were on for it immediately.
Yeah.
And Leonard, what is it about the pipes?
I suppose I've always counted myself as really, really lucky to be a piper. And it's the expressiveness of them. Like, you can get into sadness, joy, excitement, rawness within the one instrument. For me, I'm probably biased, but I wouldn't be a great man for words. But the instruments allows me to go to those places that I wouldn't have the words for.
And I always think there's something, when I hear the pipes, and I don't know, Damian, if you feel that, like, there's something quite tribal or atavistic, or you hear them and it does feel historical or ancient, or it hits something primal. Yeah.
Well, Leonard was saying there that he could, you know, he wouldn't have the words for certain things, but that the pipes could go there. Well, you know, the pipes can go to places that words don't have the words for. The words don't have the words for. I mean, for example, like, you know, abuse, like, just say the word abuse, like the word abuse needs opened out. Like, you're often talking about rape. You're talking about that. You're talking about the overpowering of somebody. Now, we're telling the story here in a public context. So that has to be bearable. Now, the kind of forensic court report verbatim of what happened to Jared is not going to bring people into this room or into the Irish Centre or to the Linen Hall Library. It's not. So we have to find a way of telling the story telling it with integrity, with depth, without fetters, but making it bearable. Now that's where the piping of like a very gifted piper makes such a valuable net contribution. Give you one small example. Like we talk, and I talk in the poems in the piece about a line being crossed. You know, my brother being groomed, and then it going into very dark territory. Now, you can put a lot of words to that, or you can hand it over. You can take it up to the point where you're entering the very heart of darkness, and then you can hand it over to the piper, who can, with, I don't know, the tech, you know, with drones and with chanters and with, he can go right there, but in a way that's bearable. So music, as we've said before, can empty you and kind of fill you, or at least leave you with something in you at the same time. I don't know that words can do that.
And the instrument is unique, as you were just talking about the chanter and the drone and the regulators. And can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe how you began to use that in composing some of the pieces that you were sort of responding to?
Yeah, I suppose, like, you have your drone, which is the constant sound. It's like in all ethnic pipes, Highland pipes, Scottish pipes, pipes from all over Europe, all over the world. So that's your tone. Then you have your chanter, which is your melody. And then your regulators, which basically is the keys that you hit on your lap that enables you to accompany yourself. And I suppose the thing about the uilleann pipes is, as Seamus Ennis said, there's about 6 or 7 colours or tones to every note. So you're listening to the, like, for instance, for this project, like, I listened to the tone and the rhythm of the words, and then I let and that influences what the instrument does. Be it joyful, be it sad, be it defiant, and be it survival. And I suppose the dexterity of the instrument and the ability to get these different tones out of it sort of leans itself to what I do then. And I suppose as a traditional musician, you have a reel, say, and you have an A part and a B part. You play your A part twice, you play your B part twice. Whereas with this, I have the freedom to just go with the emotion of a piece. So in a way, I'm using the instrument not so much to play traditional music, but to play music that's reactive.
Would you be able to show us on the pipes what you're talking about, those different parts?
Yeah, no problem. I'll go and get them.
The piece, you had an Irish word for it. What's it?
The prashkeen.
Prashkeen, the piper's apron. Yeah. Yeah, so I suppose uilleann is the Irish for elbow. That's how they got their name. And story has it like this: there was an instrument called the Irish war pipes back in the penal times, and they were banned because they signified rebellion, Irish rebellion around Cromwell times. And that's how the uilleann pipes came about. So I suppose this piece, this is the chanter, which basically plays the melody. And they say it got its name from an instrument called the pastoral pipes, which were played in France in the 1500s. And they had a chanter that was called the chanteuse, which was a longer piece that was played off the knee. So that's basically where you play your melody. So and then you have your drone, which is this. So I suppose that's the constant sound, and that's in all pipes from all over the world. And then these are what's called the regulators. So we have three, these three here. And on the pastoral pipes, which originated in France, they had the one regulator. They had one. So I suppose the instrument as we know it has been developed from the 1700s, I'd say. You know, like the late 1800s would be what we know as the modern uilleann pipes as they are now. And I suppose what I mean, like, so you have your melody, and I suppose, so let's say you're taking one note, and you're talking about where you go, what you do. So like you're, so you can push it. So that kind of enables that I suppose when I'm talking about how you express yourself as a piper, that's what you do. You're looking for all these sounds and try and make them make sense, I suppose.
You see the drone, if you just put the drone on there. Did you see that there? Just what you've done there now. Like, that would call a room's attention.
Yeah.
To you and to the thing that you're doing in a way that all the coughing and of a, you know, just a wordsmith going up and saying that there, just that's the room stilled. You know?
Yeah.
So we have that going for us, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know?
It's I suppose it's a kind of a tribal, ancient. It's a sound that dates back hundreds of years. You know, like while the instrument, okay, you've all this development in technology and how the instrument is made and what the instrument has done over the years, but at its core is a sound that's hundreds of years old.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's right. I think it's the right instrument, and I think it's our instrument, because this story that we're telling is, I mean, of course, it's known all over the world, but it has a particular place. It's in the story, and as I've said before, and as we've talked about, it's an undertold, under-processed, understood story in Ireland. So to take one of maybe the seminal instrument of Ireland to the telling of it, I think is very important. You know.
Thank you so much for bringing for showing us. Can I ask, because that kind of layering of like there's the lonely voice of the chanter and the regulator, I keep thinking of it as like a chordal accompaniment. Like it's almost like a community coming in, or and then the drone feels like historical. And there's this, like, I feel like in the poetry, because you have poems and then these kind of prose moments, you describe them as the mortar between the poems. But it occurred to me that your poetry is, you could have written like linear poems, but you haven't. They're very, they use a lot of repetition and refrain, and they echo, and I think they haunt. They're quite haunting rather than just being used to drive a narrative. And I was wondering if you could talk about the form of the poems themselves and the use of those prose interstices.
Well, the form, I suppose, you know, when you're making poems, you stake out the territory. You know what it is. Obviously, you know the territory you want to explore, and then you listen. You listen very hard, and they come to you in a certain way, you know, in the right way. So I would say they're very musical. You know, so my instrument, which is the lyric poem, like there's different forms of lyric poems, but these are very musical to put with Leonard's instrument. Part of the reason for that is, I think, you know, you don't want to leave people in bits. This is a difficult story. And it is a story. There's an arc to it, and there's I think there's redress at the end. But it is a difficult story. So we want, you know, as I said, we don't want to leave people in bits. So to tell the story truthfully and not leave people in bits, there needs to be some kind of healing element to the telling. Now, the healing is not fluffy and lovely and patting people on the head, patting the subject on the head, disrespecting the truth of my brother's story. It's not that. It's healing in this sense. Desmond Tutu talked about healing in South Africa. He says, before that can happen, before you can heal a wound, you need to clean the wound. And that's sore. So there's a kind of debridement of wound in this for me. You know, there's things in our story, in the Irish story of abuse, which there's tissue, if you like, which is necrotic, which is dead, which is, you know, so debridement isn't an easy thing. So to do that, and I would say that part of what we're trying to achieve here is that there's some healing involving the cleaning, the cleansing of a wound. That's difficult stuff. So my words, while being precise and clear and distinct, needed to be very musical, as well as having the music that this man affords, you know.
And there's something also about the live audience. I guess, like, there's something, because, you know, I think we'll have an audience where no one is unaffected. I mean, Jared's story is very unique, and it's his story, but it's also representative of so many people's stories and their family stories, or their sibling or their parent or their child. So there's something that seems like very appropriate about the communal aspect of people together.
Absolutely. And you need to look after people in the telling of a story like this. And you know, we were talking about the pipes, the ancient kind of calling, and I don't think that's too wanky. I think that's true. That is very true. But music, well, we go to it. You know, when things are almost unspeakable, almost unsayable, like grief cannot voice itself, we go to music. We go to music, and you know, there is that in this for people. There is the love that is in music. There's the care for you when you're grieving, when you're at a loss, when there aren't any words, when you don't know where to go. I mean, the arts as a whole, I think, give you somewhere to go. Yep. And certainly in this piece, this man's playing gives us somewhere to go.
When you were sort of selecting and making decisions about what to include, so some of the pieces were composed, but some are existing tunes. And I saw that one of the poems is called "The Pleasures of Hope," which I know is a hornpipe.
Yeah.
So can you talk about, like, some of it was found and reimagined?
Yeah. I suppose when Damian sent me something, I had two ways of doing it, or two ways of looking at it. With Damian, obviously. And one was, okay, I need to write, I need to compose something for this. But the other thing was, I wanted to look within the tradition to find pieces that might resonate with what we're trying to do. Like, an example would be Is Cumulum, which was composed by Padar O'Riada, the son of the great Sean O'Riada. And The Pleasures of Hope, that particular piece came as a kind of almost a tip of the hat to Seamus Heaney and Liam O'Flynn and what they did, because it was a piece that Liam played. And being very honest, I wouldn't be playing the pipes only for Liam O'Flynn and Planksty and the Bothy Band and that. So it was kind of trying to find something as well within the tradition that was kind of, you're giving a tip of the hat to someone for their influence, but you're finding something that resonates with what you're trying to do, what we're trying to do.
I was so grateful for that approach as well, because so I would say to Leonard, look, this is the way I see it going from here. Here are like a dozen, or as it ended up, 16 stepping stones, if you like, that episodes where I'll write a poem and then you respond to that in music. And so I had set those out very prosaically, and there was a bit where I was talking about how after this thing had happened to Jared, he, as the psychologists and social workers talked about, he acted out. once he'd got away from the place where the abuse happened, he just acted out. He thought, right, what the fuck? I'll just go for it. I'll get involved in the troubles to some extent. I'll get involved. I'll do everything and anything. What's the worst thing could happen? So I'm trying to express that to Leonard, and he said, well, there's this tune. It's Come Along. I don't care. I don't care. And he sent me a rough version of that tune. And in that case, I wrote the words note for note to the tune.
Brilliant.
What's the worst could happen now? It doesn't matter anyhow. It's come along. It's come along. I couldn't give a fuck. I couldn't give a flying fuck. I'd shoot it if it were a duck. I know that's to the notes of that tune. So that's the way that worked.
Yeah.
And I was very grateful for it, and I think it was right for it.
Yeah.
And the responsorial psalm, so there's one poem that sort of takes something from the liturgy, of the church. And how would you respond to that? What kind of music did you?
There's a reference to the hymn "Ag Christ Shield" within the piece that I used in that particular piece. That I really used in that particular piece. And again, it's taking lines and rhythm from what Damian does, and just going, okay, right, okay, what's resonating with me here? What can I create around that? In the most respectful manner that you can. So for that, let's say the responsorial psalm, where there's reference to the responsorial psalm, I felt it appropriate. Okay, take a line of a very famous Irish hymn, "Ag Christ Shield," and make something around that.
And that the reference and the use of that idea of responsorial psalm, I mean, it was one of those things in Gerard's story that surprised me. That, like, speaking didn't come easily to Gerard. Once he decided to speak, or it was outbreak nearly. He was at the door of the doctors, and he was kind of held there in thrall. Will I come? Will I go? And he just blurted out, "I was abused in a boarding school as a boy." In those words, "I was abused in a boarding school as a boy." And then from that point, he became involved in therapy and so on. And it was not easy for him. It was not easy. But a thing that surprised me was when he did start to speak, he determined that he would speak to the Catholic Church. He would go, he had some notion that was still in him that there I will find in some form Jesus, or as it says in the poem, or someone who knew him, or someone who knew where he was. And he brought that vestigial, if you like, or that remaining hope that he could encounter that kind of gentleness in the church. He brought that with him, and it wasn't there. It wasn't there. He couldn't find it at all. So that there's a kind of irony used there that responsorial psalm, the most famous responsorial psalm is "The Lord is my shepherd," and the refrain of that is "The Lord is not my shepherd, I shall want." So there was that kind of internal reference, as well as then, I thought, well, there's something for Leonard to do there with because I think we've been trying to ask ourselves all sorts of questions, like the main one is, how do we tell this in a way that's bearable? How do we tell this in a way that people aren't left in bits, but in fact, almost the opposite, that people can walk out of this in some way enhanced or with heartened, or how do we do that? And but then within that, we've also been asking all sorts of artistic questions, like how you talk about varying the tone, like is this tune, how is it different from the tune that's gone before? And I've been asking similar questions in relation to the poetry, but I know you've thought a lot about that and put a lot into that. Like I'll do it, and even we have different, once or twice it's not the pipes, it's the low whistle. Yeah.
I want, like, thinking about the register that you want to leave people with. And I was reading, just Seamus Heaney did sleeve notes for Liam O'Flynn's solo album called The Given Note. And he quotes Oscar Wilde's sort of paradoxical law that in art, the opposite is also true. And he says, in other words, behind those tunes, you can hear freedom as well as discipline, elegy as well as elation, longing for solitude as well as a love of the session. And it struck me, like, having heard, like, even today, the tune that you played, which you played after the poem, is it Phelan?
Fuelu.
Fuelu. And I'm wondering if you might talk about that piece, because to me, I feel like that's something that the audience can leave with. And so that we've been brought to these like troughs, but we've also like are leaving with a shield or something, a talisman almost to hold on to. And I thought that piece in particular brought that out.
Yeah, I think people will take, not everybody, when you play a piece of music, let's say Fuelu, I think that piece, no two people will take the same thing from it. Like somebody could take sadness from it, but somebody could also take great healing from it. And I think, personally speaking, when I play something, you can't tell somebody what to take from it, And as I said, there will be, somebody will take sadness, somebody will take complete healing, somebody will even take joy. Mm-hmm. But when you're playing a piece, you try and put as much of yourself and all that into that piece to give the person the option, okay, what am I going to take from this? Do I take great healing from it? Mm. Does it bring me somewhere else? But I suppose that's what music does. I think.
And Damian, for you, that poem, for me, it was like having, because I have had the opportunity to hear a lot of the pieces, it was a turning point for me, where I just, because you're an emotional, you're sort of with the speaker in all kinds of moments, in not just in the boarding school, but beyond that. And there's something that felt very restorative, or an affirmation. And was that your intent when you were writing that particular poem? Drawing on this ancient mythological idea.
Well, Jared is covered. He has loads of tattoos, and one of the biggest ones is of a Fuelu, is of this representation of a wolf-like creature, which as I was saying, in the very earliest books that are extant in the Irish language, or the Middle Irish, as it's called, they talk about this Fuelu, that there was this spirit animal. And I suppose they're talking about a time when there were a lot of woods in Ireland and people moved around a lot. And so the idea of being protected as you move around your world, it's important, and this creature protected particularly children, people who were lost, and adults who were wounded. So all of those, were very relevant to this piece. But what, see, when I write anything for the stage anyway, I try to have in mind the note. And I always talk about writing in terms of music, in the note that you want people to carry out with them. Meaning the idea, but also the feeling you want people. If you're in the business of moving people, as I would say I am, I try to write from the heart to the heart. I try to move people. Well, then the ethical question is, okay, if you think That's up to you to do that. Where do you want to move people to? And think about that and be ethical about that. So I always think about that first, nearly. I want people to end up here. And where I wanted to end up was in a positive place, realistically. And I know from being beside Jared that the point where, as it says in my kind of literary way, where he was able to bless himself and know himself to be blessed. So in other words, that's self-healing, regard that's livable with, and for him that was in having a relationship with this boy whom he at times despised. Why did you not fight back? Why did you not bite at? Why did you not kick and scream? Because you were 11. Because you were overpowered. Because you didn't have the language. Because you didn't have you didn't know what to do. That's okay. So I wanted to reach to that place where he was making an accommodation with the boy and taking the boy by the hand, taking, if you like, himself by the hand, and to invite the audience to observe that, and for that to be a note to leave them with, and that idea of arriving at a point in your life where you can bless yourself and know yourself to be blessed. And I think, that, if you like, intellectually is the way I wanted to resolve it, poetically. And I think it's the way that musically, because we have to musically resolve this piece, which is a musical piece as well. And I think that's what Leonard has done musically.
I think that's a really beautiful place to end. And thank you so much, Damian and Leonard, for this project and for talking with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're now going to hear Fuelu, performed by Damian Gorman and Leonard Barry.
In the very earliest tellings of our story as Irish people, there is reference made to a wild creature called the Fuelu. And the Fuelu is said to be a protector of children and of wounded and lost adults. Boy Fuelu. It was a Fuelu saved me when I could take no more. A spirit animal, a werewolf, that kept the wolf from the door. It came as a family member. It came and lit a fire when I was freezing by myself and stayed till it was sure. It was a Fuelu saved me when I could take no more. A spirit animal, a werewolf that kept the wolf from the door. It came to me as a counsellor when I was on my knees. It came in the guise of a lawyer who could see the wood from the trees. But the greatest form my Fuelu took, the one that saved my life, was as other wounded people I could share my story with. It was a Fuelu saved me when I could take no more. A spirit animal, a werewolf that kept the wolf from the door.